Well, hello and welcome to this week's Angling News KZN Fishing Report. Guys, what a week we have had in KZN. South Coast is the highlight of the week, but the reason I am broadcasting from the Blue Lagoon is because of the Garrick. Guys, we know we're in October. We know that the shad season is closed, and the talk of this week has been the Garrick. Now, if you've got a boat, get out there. If you've got a friend that has a boat, call them and get out there. And if you do not have a friend that has a boat, well, guys, just go and hire a charter because the Garrick are wild. In KZN, from the south coast all the way up to the north, there are Garrick even coming out on Usuris. So, guys, we're going to get into a full detailed report of what's going on this week in KZN. But before we do, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Kingfisher and CMH Pinetown, with the brands being Proton, Mitsubishi, and of course, Nissan. So, guys, this week in KZN, starting off down the south coast, they have had a variety of species. And now these species were coming out from Port Edward all the way down to the block. Guys, we are talking bream, huge bream up to 4.5 kilos. There were good amounts that were coming up in the 3 kilo mark. And of course, quite a few smaller ones. There was a whole lot of rock species. Guys, the scratching species down the south coast has been truly phenomenal. But on top of that, we've also seen a lot of brusher. We have seen a huge amount of Garrick. And I'm glad to report that there has been shad, been caught, but released. Now, you can't help but catch that shad during this time of year. But when you do, guys, the season is closed, so go and release that fish. And I'm glad to report that that's what anglers have been doing over this past week. So no need for me to rant on about that. It's all about the good news today. And today we are talking about that incredible amount of species that has been coming out down the south coast. I mean, this is our record amount of catches that were sent through so far. So, guys, as you can see, there's a lot of edibles in these images. But apart from that, down at Port Edward, there's also a lot of inedibles. There are some skates, there are some gray sharks, there are some nurse sharks. So whether you're fishing for edible or inedible action down the south coast, just get down to the south coast. You will get some rods bending. Now, moving down to Scottburger, Park Rennie, and Rocky Bay. Guys, the Garrick are out and about. There is a fair amount of bottom fishing going on. So if you are chasing the Darga and Kilbeck salmon, yes, Rocky Bay is the area. And apart from that, a fair amount of bream species that's been on the bite. Moving on down to Warner Beach and Amanzimtoti. Well, Gary has reported once again, Garrick. Guys, I'm going to be talking about the Garrick throughout the entire coastline because that's what's been the predominant species over this past week. So we've got Garrick. Apart from that, there has been some brusher, there's been the stumpies, and if you are looking to fish offshore down there, well, hey, it's Garrick, guys. So Garrick on live bait, sardines, pretty much on the right day, whatever you throw in there, you will get a Garrick. Now, moving on down to Durban, guys, the reason I'm broadcasting from Blue Lagoon is because this entire week, I've got reports of the Garrick coming out right here. Now, it was a bit far for the rock and surf anglers. Don't get me wrong, there were a few anglers that did get some Garrick off Blue Lagoon, but the ski boaters has really reaped the rewards. No matter what they threw at that Garrick, they were getting them. There's been an absolute influx of Garrick at the moment. Now if you're looking for species apart from that Garrick, guys, there has been stumpies, there has been some grunter, there has been some shad, but I'm glad to report the guys were putting them back. And towards Addington, the guys were getting a fair amount of inedibles. There were a few skates, there were a few gray sharks, there were some nice milkies. In fact, one of those gray sharks weighing up to about 20 kilos plus, which is a beautiful size for a gray shark. And once again, another highlight of Durban has been the harbor. The harbor has produced some huge grunter. I'm talking some real big size grunter out in the Durban Harbor. And apart from the grunter, there were kingfish caught on the spinning tackle on your lighter side, and a fair amount of that coming out. So if you're spinning in the harbor, go out and get some kingfish. So Durban all the way to the south coast, looking absolutely fantastic. Now moving on to the north coast of KZN. Well, guys, on your north coast, it has been far more productive than the previous couple of weeks. The weather conditions were perfect. In fact, the weather conditions were so good that it was actually on some days difficult to get a fish. Now, the reason why we said the conditions were too perfect and hard to fish, well, we're going to talk about that on another show. Right now, it's all about the fishing report. And on this week's fishing report on the north coast, you have got some bronze bream, you've got some stone bream, some nice sizes at that. There were a few shad that were coming out. Once again, reports were the anglers were being responsible and putting them back. And on your offshore side, there has been some snook, and of course, once again, there has been that Garrick on the bite. Moving further up from Belito, Mvoti, guys, there has been a fair amount of Garrick once again coming out. And a beautiful size GT on live bait. So thank you to Savika from Degusa for providing us with these images. Beautiful fish coming out on that area. Moving up to Mchinzini Banks. Well, guys, unfortunately, Nick hasn't had much to report on this week. Things are a bit difficult on the Rock and Surf side. However, the river is looking quite positive. There's a lot of mullets around, and as we know, when that mullets are out there, there's something that's going to come down and feed on them. More likely, some Garrick. Now, moving up to Richards Bay and St. Lucia. Well, Richards Bay, guys, it is Cobtober. It is inedible action happening at Richards Bay. We've got some good reports of some cob. We've got reports of Garrick in the harbor. And if you're looking for that inedible action, as I mentioned, well, there has been a couple good-sized browns and honeycombs that's been on the bite. Now, up at St. Lucia, the town is busy. The holiday makers out and about. And if you are out there, what you want to do is head towards the St. Lucia mouth, because every night we are getting reports of the cob being on the bite. Now, I've heard these cob are around the 5 kilo mark, which is a fairly decent size if you want to take something for the pan. So there has been some cob out there. There are a lot of holiday makers heading up to Cape Vital. However, we do not get many reports of what's going on up there. And when we do, we'll be sure to let you know. And now finally, for the freshwater side of KZN, guys, there has been some trout, but this trout has been more on the private dams. The rivers are low, the rivers are clear. And on our podcast, we've got Jan talking about how to fish those rivers if they are low and clear. But for now, what we can tell you is that it hasn't been fireworks on those open rivers. The Stillwater private dams has been producing the goods. The Bear side has been relatively quiet with reports coming through. However, we do know Midma is on the up and up, and Albert Falls has been pretty quiet this past week. But of course, as the last few weeks, guys, scaly action. If you are a fly angler, you got to get involved in that scaly action, because we have got such good reports of the scalies that's on the bite over this past week. So now moving on to the weather for this next couple days, it's only going to get better. The fish are set to come on the bite from this afternoon. Tomorrow is going to be absolutely fantastic. Saturday is going to be a pearler of a day. And Sunday, not so good. Now, bear in mind, Saturday afternoon, it is going to get a bit windy. We are talking about winds up to about 40 knots per hour. And that's going to continue until Sunday morning, where we are going to get a bit of rain. But that is going to subside. And Sunday would be the day to go and target the bronze bream. So guys, all in all, KZN is looking absolutely fantastic. We have got fish all over the place. My pick of the week has been the South Coast. But if you are concerned about the price factor of fuel, which we all are after this week, well, Fish Durban, the fish are coming out. And not to say that there aren't any on the North Coast. I mean, I am heading up the North Coast tomorrow as well. I am definitely going to be dropping a line, because the bronze bream and those rock species are out there. And to go and target that on some light tackle, well, that's going to be some absolute fun. So we got a few days left for the kids on the school holidays. Get them out there, get them to Belito, get them onto that scratching species. If you want to take the whole family out and for everyone to get something, head on down to the South Coast. You will be rewarded. And guys, whatever you do, go out and get some Garrick. But when you do, always remember, keep that fishing area tidy. Respect the bag and size limits. Respect the rules and regulations. Like I said, shad season is closed. You will get onto a shad, put him back. And when you are out there, guys, fish for the future.